It's July 11th, 1844, and it's one of those suffocatingly hot, humid summer days that New York City has become famous for. And we find ourselves somewhere on the east side of the East River, standing in front of an imposing compound of buildings. From somewhere inside the compound, we hear a cacophony of children's voices. A jarring contrast to the silence of the young boy standing outside at the foot of the steps of the compound as he looks up toward an uncertain future. An official-looking gentleman next to the boy begins walking up the steps to the front door, beckoning the small child along, which he does obediently. The door creaks open, and a stern woman at a desk motions them both forward. "Another one?" the woman asks blandly as she pulls out her ledger. The gentleman nods. "Yes, by order of the commissioner," he says, "by reason of destitution." The woman shakes her head in what looks to be disapproval, but she dutifully writes it down, then looks at the boy. "How old are you, young man?" "4, the boy replies in a small voice. She scribbles it down. "And your name?" "John Connis," he says. She writes his name in her ledger in fresh black ink, then looks back at the boy. "Welcome to Long Island Farms, John Connis." I'm Karen Harding, an amateur genealogist, and I've spent an embarrassing amount of time and money unlocking the stories of the people who had to exist for me to exist.
And I'm Kim McMasters, a millennial with no interest in history, having kids, or leaving a legacy of my own.
And you're listening to Low Ancestry. Each episode, I'll share one story from my family tree with Kim, proving that ordinary people like me, with ordinary ancestry like mine, have compelling and sometimes scandalous or heartbreaking stories buried within them, because people have been messy for time immemorial. Welcome back, Kim.
Welcome back, Karen.
Good to have you back today. I think you'll be excited about today's episode because something I like to call a bite-sized episode.
I like things that are bite-sized.
Yeah, it's just a little guy.
Something about humans, we like small.
Huh.
Don't you think? I feel like minis and small things like how cute is like a little...
That's true.
So I'm excited is what I'm saying.
Great. So this seems exactly for you and all humans.
Yeah, this is for everybody.
Sometimes, Kim, I find some very cool information that's just like a snapshot of a full story. And for one reason or another, I either can't find more about the story or there just simply like isn't anything more, which means I'm left with something more akin to an anecdote than an actual story.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to let those slip through the cracks. I still want to talk about them. They'll just be little guys.
Just little guys.
They're just little guys.
I love a little guy.
They're great anecdotes, so don't worry about that. They're good. They're fun. They're exciting.
Thank you for confirming the quality of today's podcast.
Yes. But there's definitely going to be more to the story that we're not going to know about, and that's going to feel a little frustrating.
You know that I hate that.
I know you do.
I really can't stand it.
There's always more questions than answers, these episodes especially. Today's story is about a man named John Connis, as you heard in the intro when he was a young boy. John is my third great-grandfather on my mom's side through my grandmother. So what that means is my mom's great-grandfather.
Got it.
On the face of it, John Connis's life was not necessarily noteworthy. I mean, it's noteworthy in so much as like all humans are noteworthy for having lived.
Yeah.
But his adult life was particularly dull, as far as I can tell. There's not a lot about his adult life. He was a laborer by trade. He lived and worked and died in, you guessed it, Binghamton, New York. Hey.
The Valley of Opportunity?
The Valley of Opportunity. Thank you. You're really learning. Mm-hmm. I can't wait to take you there someday.
I can't wait to go.
And then you'll really learn about it. So he's in Binghamton, New York. As we've talked about before, this is Haudenosaunee land in the southern tier of New York State. And a lot of my ancestors, as we know, have been bebopping around that city for a long time. John Connis is no different. He lives there with his wife, Rena, and their 7 children until he dies around 1896. I actually don't have a record of his death. But John didn't grow up in Binghamton, New York. And though his life was pretty ordinary, or his adult life was pretty ordinary, it's his childhood that I want to talk about.
Oh, no.
Because John didn't have a very easy childhood.
Oh, no.
And I don't know if John would agree with me on this, but I think he grew up somewhere far more exciting than Binghamton in New York City.
Okay.
The Big Apple.
Mm-hmm.
Up until John is 15, he lives in New York City. He's born in 1839 in Kings County, New York, in the area that used to be part of Long Island, but it's now been consolidated into like New York City proper. I'm not going to start with John's birth. I actually want to start in 1844 when John is 4 years old, turning 5. So first, here's some other things that happen around the world in 1844.
This is my favorite part.
The first Young Men's Christian Association, or the YMCA, is founded in London.
Now that is a fact I did not know.
Neither did I, but let's thank them for their service. And by that, I mean for the song.
And the village people.
Also, Joseph Smith, the leader of the Latter-day Saints movement, he is murdered by an angry mob in 1844. I believe his brother was also killed in this same incident. Also, the Dominican Republic gains its independence from Haiti.
Hey, is that good?
I have no idea. Okay. I just know that it happened.
Okay.
Hungarian is declared the official language of Hungary.
What was it before?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Yeah, whenever we go through these, I don't have any more information.
I have more questions and I never get the answers.
Next, Kim, the first electrical telegram is sent in 1844. For John, 1844 is not a great year because on July 11th, 1844, John is admitted into New York City system of almshouses at just 5 years old. He's brought by the order of the commissioner, or so it says in the admissions ledger, and the reason that they give for his admission is destitution. We don't know what prompted his arrival. In fact, I don't know anything about John before this moment.
Really?
So we actually don't know if anyone accompanied him there at all. We don't know if his parents are alive or dead.
Wow.
We don't even really know which almshouse he was brought to originally, since the almshouse ledger was kind of like a catch-all ledger for the department. But we do know where he ends up. And he ends up at a place called the Long Island Farms. It's another place that I actually don't know a ton about because it might not surprise you to hear that when you Google Long Island Farms, it's a really generic prompt.
Yeah, I believe that.
But I did find some newspaper articles about it. There's one from 1846 that says the Long Island Farms was located just opposite Blackwell Island on Long Island. So Blackwell Island is actually known today as Roosevelt Island. It's a skinny little island in the East River between Manhattan and Queens.
Okay.
If that helps orient you.
Yeah.
I worked so hard to figure out what it is in the modern day because I feel like someone from New York City will be so mad.
Yeah, somebody's going to get pissed
if I mess any of this up.
Mm-hmm.
But that just means that the Long Island Farms is in modern day Queens on the East River, like close to the East River. So based on what little information I've been able to glean, it seems like Long Island Farms is solely for orphaned or destitute children. So they're able to live and go to school there away from adults living in their own separate almshouse. And in the U.S. history of almshouses, this is not traditional. Usually they just throw everyone in the same place. So it's like orphans, mental health patients, unhoused people, older folks, which, as you can imagine, recipe for disaster. It was a disaster all across the country. The city was able to have a place funded by the government to keep what they called destitute children separate and also give them an education they might not otherwise receive. So there's this article that talks about what life was like at Long Island Farms. And this was written during the time that John Connis was there. So the journalist attended an event called the Exhibition of Orphan Children of Long Island, which I guess was just like a concert that the children put on like in the street that people were allowed to just come to.
So it sounds like they were put on display.
I think so.
To potentially be adopted?
Yes. It's like when any place puts on like a special promo event.
Yeah. Oh no.
I also think because it was government funded, it was funded by taxes. I think there was a little like an element of we want to show that like these children are like good children and good for society. And like we're making the world a better place kind of a thing.
Okay.
So I think that was part of it. But the journalist notes that while the children live there, they have 3 square meals a day. They go to their studies and then they play until dinner time and go to bed. So it just describes it as this very like normal place to be. I would like to note there were other articles during this time period that talked about the poor care of the children at Long Island Farm, saying that they found moldy bread and that children had died of starvation and neglect. But other articles disputed that and like refuted those claims, saying that the oversight board made surprise visits and they can say that the orphanage is fine and everything's great. So I can't say one way or the other what it was really like.
Right.
I just know that there were people at that time period saying both things. But I mean, no matter what, it's an orphanage.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be a great situation for any of the children.
And I have to say, like, surely if we don't know anything about his parents, wouldn't it be that he was admitted as an orphan if his parents weren't alive anymore? Like destitution sounds like surrendering more than it is like something else.
I agree with you.
Okay.
So I've been on like a mad search for John's parents. I don't have a name, so I can't, it's so difficult, but we're going to talk a little bit about why I think, at least by this time, John's parents are probably dead or they really had nothing to do with him. And we could talk a little bit more about that. But I think you're on the right track.
Sad.
I would agree with you. So at this time in the mid 1840s, while John is at the orphanage, New York City is going through this significant reorganization about how they handle their almshouses and public institutions. And that reorganization is prompted by the large influx of immigrants, mostly Irish, who start coming to the States and mostly coming to New York City to find work. And these migrating individuals and their families were mostly destitute upon arrival, so they needed public services immediately. New York City needed more real estate and more structure to support the influx and expand the way that they governed their public institutions. So the way that they made their solutions was they were going to use Blackwell Island, as I said, modern day Roosevelt Island, and then an island north of that, Randall Island. They were going to make those 2 islands solely for all of their public institutions. So that's prisons, mental health institutions, orphanages, juvenile like delinquent centers. And it's the modern day like Arkham, like basically, or I mean, Rikers Island is similar. Yeah. It's like put them all on an island and that's where they go.
Woof.
Yeah, exactly. So during starting in the 1830s, all the way up into the 1850s, they did this transfer of everyone onto these islands. So when John is at Long Island Farms, they're already starting to move children to Randall Island in this new orphanage island.
Oh,
yeah. But in 1846, there's a representative that visits Long Island Farms from a private orphanage in northern Manhattan called Leeks and Watts. And when he visits the Long Island Farms, he's looking for orphan boys to take back to the private orphanage.
Whoa.
I know that sounds so shady.
Yeah.
I don't think it was, but it sounds shady.
Also, can you imagine being one of the orphan boys and having to like sell yourself
to
the
like,
fancy man?
Here's why you want me for Leeks and Watts.
Yeah, just imagine they're all like pitching to
I'm
a board.
I'm a go-getter. I'm a thought leader.
Oh, these poor children.
As far as situations for orphan children go, Leeks and Watts was actually a nicer place that you would probably want to get chosen for. They only took boys. They didn't become co-ed until much later. And they made a point to say that all of their children were full orphans. So if you were an orphan who was visited by a parent and were like a half orphan, then you would not be considered for Leeks and Watts. So there were a group of boys chosen from Long Island Farms, John Connis being one of them. And the letter from the representative said all of these boys did not have anyone who had visited them at the time they were at the orphanage. So that's why I think his parents were either dead at this time, or they really did like fully give him up and did not come to see him at all, which was rare because a lot of families would give up their children because they couldn't take care of them, but still come go see them at these orphanages. So it gives us a little bit of a clue into John Connis's life.
I'm a little stuck on something.
Yeah, for sure.
Running a private orphanage.
Yeah.
That can't be a benevolent endeavor.
I mean, I think it kind of was.
Okay.
And Leek & Watts was founded by a rich guy who died. I believe it was Leek himself.
Okay.
He died. He had no children. And he said that his estate needed to be used in service of poor children.
Okay. So we have like a Hamilton thing happening a little bit. But immediately I go to this place of not trusting anyone who has enough money to start a private orphanage.
Even though they're not known as Leek & Watts today, the institution is still running in New York City. Yes, there's still a juvenile center. Mm-hmm.
Whoa.
Yeah.
But also the thought of like going and shopping for like full orphan boys and like finding the good ones and taking them back is strange.
It's going to get stranger.
Oh, no.
So Leek & Watts, the estate, was actually really nice. As I said, it's in North Manhattan. It was 50 acres in size. So on today's map of New York, it's from Amsterdam Ave to Morningside Drive, and then from 109th Street to 113th Street.
Okay.
Which means nothing to me.
No.
That's going to mean something to someone.
Yeah.
But nothing to me. The main building itself was built in the Greek Revival style with Corinthian columns, and it was all very fancy. I do want to continue John's story, of course, at Leek & Watts and beyond. But I'd like, if I can, Kim, I'd like to wrap up the chapter of Long Island Farms as a place.
Okay.
Because by 1847, all the children had been moved from Long Island Farms. John and these other boys went to Leek & Watts, and then the rest of them went to Randall's Island.
Okay.
And the city was planning on making the Long Island farm buildings into a quarantine area for recent migrants who come off the ship. And a lot of them had a variation of typhus that was called ship fever.
Ooh.
So they were like, if they have this, we'll put them all here in quarantine to get them away from everyone. But the local neighborhood around Long Island Farms was so enraged by that they came and burned all the buildings down before they could utilize them. It was like a huge thing.
Whoa.
Yeah. And if I may go on a tangent.
We could never.
Isn't it crazy that we're roughly 180 years removed from this moment, and we literally act the same way about migrants in this country? Long Island Farms is burnt to the ground. Back at Leek & Watts, which is not burnt to the ground, and they have beautiful columns, don't they, Kim?
And you said 50 acres?
Yeah, that's what I read.
That's a lot.
He was rich.
Yeah. To conceptualize that on Manhattan right now is just like wild.
I can't even conceptualize what 50 acres is anyway.
Yeah.
Can you?
No. But it's a lot. But I know.
It's a lot. That's a lot of acres.
It's a lot of acres.
Back at Leek & Watts, John Connis ends up staying at the orphanage for 6 years. We see that he appears on the 1850 census there with all of the other orphans there at the time. And this is just an aside for me. Their occupation, like the census always has like name, age, occupation. The occupation for all the children was inmate.
Oh, no.
Not student. Couldn't do that.
No, couldn't.
Inmate. Yeah, pretty wild stuff. But then in 1852, he's discharged from the orphanage at the age of 13, which makes sense because Leek & Watts intended only to care for orphans from the ages 3 to 12. So he ages out of the orphanage, but he's not thrown to the streets. Leek & Watts worked closely with religious leaders like pastors in small towns in upstate New York to coordinate sending kids from the orphanage in the city to families up north, and not to adopt them out, but to indenture them to families where they could work on the farm. And this practice is most famously exemplified in Anne of Green Gables' beloved book series.
You know, I've never read it.
You haven't?
No.
Not even watched the 90s show?
No.
I would love to watch that with you.
Okay, let's do it.
Honestly, like the 90s, whoever like Anne falls in love with, I'm so mad that I can't remember his name. The 90s actor.
Big crush.
Oh my God, he was so cute.
I always thought she was very pretty.
Yeah, she is.
And pretty red hair. But that's the whole thing, is she's an orphan and then she goes to work on a farm.
Yeah, they literally adopt her to work on the farm.
Wow.
Yeah, so this practice, it's not normal.
How's the quality of life for a child that follows this path?
I do not know.
Okay.
I bet it varies individual to individual. In John's case, he was indentured to the Meade family in Berkshire, New York. That's in Tioga County, which is really close to Binghamton. And I don't know anything about his life there. I've tried to find stuff about it and I can't. So from this point on is where John's life kind of becomes nothing more than a couple of like data points to me.
Whoa.
So he could have had a bad time at the Meade family's farm. I don't know. But he's there for a while. And then over the next few decades, the only thing I know about John from genealogical records is like these touch points from the US Census. So in 1855, he's at the Meade's farm. 1865, he's an adult laborer on somebody else's farm somewhere else. 1870, he's married to his wife, Rena. It says he's working in something called scale works. No clue what that is. I don't know what scale works are. And then in 1880 that's the last census that I find him in. And he's a laborer again with a growing family of 4 children at this time.
Wow.
We know that he has 7 children, but I don't see him on any other censuses. So based on like the year of his last child being born, that's why I think it's like somewhere right before 1896 is when he dies, but I can't find a death record.
What is like the most common or like potentially reasonable explanation for not having a death certificate?
A lot of times it's because before the 1900s, or even before like the 1920s, a lot of states did not even require a death certificate.
Oh, okay.
The New York required a death certificate by 1870, but different counties were pretty laissez-faire about it.
Gotcha.
So it could be that. It could also be that there was a fire at one of the places where his death certificate was. I don't see him on the index, so it makes me think that he never had one to begin with. I do know where he's buried because it's near my grandma's house, but I visited there and I didn't write down the date on his tombstone and I can't find it online. So the next time I go to New York, I do kind of want to go to his tombstone and double check it.
We'll do a part 2.
We'll do a part 2.
A follow up.
What his tombstone says.
Yeah.
So anyway, John lives a pretty normal life after his life in New York City, as far as I know. At least nothing notable happens. But I do want to say, I think it's notable that nothing notable happens, because I think when you start your life out without this familial support system, especially at such a young age, it's really difficult to overcome that kind of trauma. And so the fact that we don't have any details about John, I think, is in itself notable to me, at least. He could have been a horrible person for all I know, because I don't know anything about him.
Mm-hmm.
But he did end up making a life for himself and for his family. And that sort of thing is not a given when you have those kinds of obstacles. So, I mean, we've certainly seen other stories of where childhood hardship has led to a lifetime of hardship, and that could have happened, but that is not what seems to have happened to John.
It's pretty impressive.
I think so.
We can thank Leek for that.
Thank you, Leek. And Watts.
And Watts, whoever they are.
Yeah. Well, so that's my story of John Connis, Kim. Any resonance?
I'm pretty stuck on, to be totally honest, I'm really stuck on the notion of someone going to an orphanage and plucking out the ripe kids to bring back to their own orphanage. Like, surely that's not how it was.
I bet it was,
but
though.
There's something about that that's really bothering me.
I think it should bother you.
And also the burning a facility that was meant to quarantine migrants is pretty
It's evocative.
We've touched on this before. I have a really hard time with the fact that like nothing has changed.
Yeah.
And some things have changed, but also not enough has changed. And that bums me out.
Yes. It bums me out too.
So
I mean, it all happens over and over again, but the less we ignore it and the more we point out that this keeps cycling, the more hope we have, I think.
That's true. And again, I mean, you're right. It is not only notable, but I think probably remarkable to live a long life, to have a family, to supposedly not do anything that he was arrested for.
Yeah, exactly.
No petite crimes.
Yeah.
With a beginning like that. I think that's pretty impressive.
I think so. And my resonance is along those lines, I think. My resonance is the way that has trickled through my family, I think, through the line. So my grandma talks about her grandmother all the time. Her name was Ruth, not my grandma, my great-great-grandma.
Mm-hmm.
Her name was Ruth. That's one of John's daughters. And my grandma talks about her constantly because Ruth lived at my grandma's house while she was growing up. So it was my grandma, her parents, and her grandma Ruth. And so my grandma always says she was raised by two mothers.
Aww.
And she loved both of them dearly. And she talks about Ruth all the time as the person who, showed her love and showed her how to be a good Christian. And a lot of who she is today is because of Ruth.
Wow.
And so I think John, whoever he was, whatever kind of a person he was, I at least know someone very loving was raised in his home and has become an important part of my family and who we all have become. And I think there's something very, very special about that. And I really hope someday to learn the name of John's parents, especially his mother, because I don't know, I feel like if there's any way for like someone who's passed on to know what's going on in the world or on this mortal plane, I think she would be really happy to know that even though she wasn't able to be in her son's life, the legacy of John in my family is one of feeling loved and taken care of. And that trauma of abandonment did not get passed down because Ruth made sure that her daughter and her granddaughter were very much loved and never felt alone. And my grandma has made us feel very loved and taken care of. So, I don't know, there's something special to like recognize when bad stuff doesn't get passed down. Not that zero bad stuff has gotten passed down in my family.
Just to be clear.
Yeah, every family is still passing stuff down. But this one didn't.
Yeah.
This one didn't get passed down. What got passed down was the feeling of being taken care of. And I think that's really nice.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
I hope that for everybody.
Me too. Tune in next time for when that doesn't happen.
Oh, no!
I'm just kidding. Thanks for being here, Kim, for a little guy.
Thanks, Karen, for introducing me to the little guy.
Okay, bye.
Low Ancestry is written and produced by Karen Harding and co-hosted by me, Kim McMasters, with original music and audio engineering by Benjamin Malk. Original cover art was designed by Christina Swanson of Swan Song Creative. Resources pertaining to today's episode and a link to the official bibliography can be found in our show notes or at our website, lowancestry.com. All research was conducted by Karen, but she's been known to be wrong on occasion. So if you'd like to connect with Karen or even send her a correction, you can email us at connect@lowancestry.com or find us on Instagram @lowancestry. Genealogy is, after all, a community effort. Thank you so much for listening, and if you like what you hear, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you, and frankly, we really need this.